When we talk about mixtures, there are several different types. So one of those types is solutions, which is what we've been talking about, and we do talk mostly about in chemistry. They're homogeneous. They are on the molecular level, so they're very small particles that are uniformly mixed throughout our solvent. We have other types of mixtures. One is called a suspension, and they're heterogeneous and they separate out on if we let them sit for a while. These are things like muddy water where the particles will settle out. There's another type of mixture that is called a colloid. So these are heterogeneous, but they do not separate out on standing. So the particles can coagulate and they can't pass through a semi-permeable membrane, but they do stay suspended in the mixture. And there's two different types that we can look at. There's hydrophilic, which means they like water. They're stabilized by the attraction for the water. And there's hydrophobic, and these are stabilized by the charges that are on the surface of the particles, and those particles repel each other. The way that we can tell the difference between solutions or suspensions and colloids is they show the Tyndall effect and Brownian motion. So Brownian motion is where the particle moves irregularly throughout that mixture. So you can observe that particle bouncing around through the collisions with other particles in our mixture. You may have noticed this if you've ever looked at dust particles in a beam of light. You can see that they actually move kind of erratically due to the collisions with the air molecules. So there are several types of colloidal suspensions. So there's aerosols, that's when we're mixing liquids with a gas. So that's things like fog, so water droplets that are suspended in the air. We can also have solid aerosols where there's a solid that is mixed into the gas, and that would be like smoke. We have foams, which are like whipping cream where there's gas suspended in a liquid. We have emulsions. Emulsions are a liquid suspended in a liquid, so that's like milk because there's fat globules that are suspended in the water that make up the milk. And we can even have some solid emulsions where there's a liquid suspended in a solid, and that would be things like opal where there's water suspended inside of a silica glass. So these are all very interesting types of mixtures to study. Soaps are a mixture we're pretty familiar with. They're made by taking either fats or oils, which are made of triglycerides, and reacting them with a very strong base. By doing this, we form a fatty acid and glycerol, and the fatty acids are referred to as fatty acids because they have a carboxylic acid head group and a long carbon tail group. So that head group is polar and attracted to water, which makes it hydrophilic. That tail is nonpolar and hydrophobic, that attracts to oily substances, so it dissolves fats and oils. It takes those oily substances and because they're attracted to each other, they actually form a micelle. So a micelle, we've got the acid head groups on the outside and all the hydrophobic tails in towards the center. And it makes an emulsification of these micelle groups. So as we add it, again we have that head group, which is polar, and that long tail group with lots of carbons and hydrogens, which is nonpolar. They congregate, they form an emulsification where those polar head groups are attracted to the polar water, and the nonpolar tail groups all hide to the center because they are hydrophobic, and so they all hide to the center, forming these things called micelles. Now, if we put them into something like hexane that was nonpolar, our micelles would, the tails would be attracted to that, and the head groups would move towards the inside. We can tell whether or not we have an emulsification or a colloid or suspension versus a solution based on the Tyndall effect. So the Tyndall effect is the scattering of light. If we do not see that light beam, then it is a solution. When we do see the light scattering based on larger particle sizes, then this is a colloid or suspension, because we can see those particles scattering the light. Micelles will actually repel each other, and we get this repulsion, which is what keeps them in suspension in the water solution. As always, there's some suggested problems for you to try to make sure you understand the concepts from this chapter.